Well, good morning there, everybody. How you guys doing today? You good? You good? Excellent. You should be good. I am good, and one of the reasons I am good is because we are starting off something. I shared this last week, want to share it again, but we want to encourage you, a new thing that we are doing. We are carpet bombing social media as a church. That's what we're doing. And so we have this whole thing we are rolling out called #BetterWithJesus. And I didn't explain why we went with this particular label, but it came out of some stuff that we've been working on lately as a leadership in the church. And we've been talking often about how life with Jesus is just better, or marriage with Jesus is just better. Parenting children with Jesus is better. Being parented by parents with Jesus is better. So Jesus is better. That is our hashtag as a church. And so we are encouraging all of you, whatever social media platforms you may be on, to subscribe to us on those platforms. And then twice a week, we're going to be putting out just little nuggets that are reminders or encouragements, great verses or quotes, just things that kind of stick with you a little bit through the day. And so, again, this is a new thing we're doing, #BetterWithJesus. And so we encourage all of you, whatever your favorite social media platform is, please subscribe to us on that. And then that way you'll be seeing that stuff come through your feed. And it's just that reminder of like, oh yeah, that's right, that's a great thing for me to do. I need to remember that. Or that's a great encouragement to my life. And sometimes there's going to be hard and bad days, and all the more, those are going to be really helpful for you. So encourage you again, #BetterWithJesus. Get a hold of us on all of the different social media platforms, and hopefully you're encouraged by that. So that's what's going on. Other than that, we're in the home stretch of Genesis right now. So I want to go ahead and pray, and then we'll get underway with what Jesus has for us today. Go ahead and join me. Jesus, I thank you for this crazy story throughout the book of Genesis, and these individuals that we're coming in contact with that in one sense we go, man, I have nothing in common with these people. And in another sense we go, man, I have everything in common with these people. And I thank you for the enduring legacy of these stories, and how story is powerful, how story, again, just kind of grounds us to reality. And we see how you interact then in the stories of these people and how that translates into our story as well. So I pray today as we look again at this text that you're going to be working on us in such a way that we receive it well, so that we might live it well and do so in the context of the grace that you give. So we thank you and love you and praise you today in your good name. Amen. So I'm curious, how many of you have younger siblings? Good number of you. How many of you that had younger siblings always felt like the younger sibling got away with everything? Yeah. How many of you were the youngest sibling of all? How many of you felt like you got away with everything? Yeah. Everybody shooting straight. I just want to make sure about that. All right, well, today is all about a sibling rivalry, and those of you with younger siblings, this may trigger your PTSD today, right? You're going to be like, yes, I know this one. This happened to me often in my life. And so if you have a Bible, I want to encourage you right now to open up to the book of Genesis. We're going to be starting in Genesis chapter 25. Now, Amy Glover doesn't have her Bible to open up. She left it here. Amy Glover. Would you like your Bible, Amy Glover? Oh, I'm so happy you want a Bible. That's so great. So that's perfect. She's such a godly woman. So, all right, so maybe if you are not familiar with Genesis, or you're not familiar with the story, or maybe this is your first time with us, let me give you a simple understanding of Genesis. It is a history book. It is a history book written by a guy named Moses, writing about history. He didn't live in the time of this particular book. It's the first book of the Bible. So he is a historian, and he's writing about basically the birth of their nation, the Israelite nation, in the same way that we might read 1776 and learn about George Washington and the Continental Congress and learn about the birth of our country. Genesis is the birth of their country and their culture. And so the first 11 chapters are kind of how God created and how things spun up and how we rebelled against God really quickly, and we were awesome at our rebellion. Sin and humanity just go hand to glove. It was just this thing that accelerated all the way through to where God then floods the earth, and then you would think that after the flood it's okay, but nope, we're still good at sin. Sin kind of roots up again, has this giant tower that's built, the Tower of Babel, because they want to kind of work their way to being like deities themselves. And so God scatters the nations. He says, I won't destroy them, but I'll scatter them. But then in light of that, he then takes this initiative to work in the system of broken human beings, to work in the system of divided nations, to regather the nations again. Now, it's a long game. He's still regathering the nations. It's not a completed thing yet, right? But that is the mission, to regather the nations. And so in Genesis 12, out of nowhere, there's this dude named Abram that eventually becomes Abraham, who's worshiping other gods. He's a pagan dude, and God steps into his life with grace and says, I am calling you to myself to make you a great nation, and from you one day my chosen one will come, and he will begin to truly reclaim the nations. And so he makes this promise with Abraham. Now, what we've learned in our series is that Abraham was not some great guy. We have this tendency to look at the heroes of the Bible and kind of treat them sort of in this antiseptic way, like they're clean and nice and tidy. But we found that, no, Abraham was a messed up guy, right? Had a lot of sin in his life, but God placed his grace on him. As his story unfolds, he eventually has a son named Isaac, actually had a son with the maid before that, but then has Isaac, and in a show and step of faith, is willing to even sacrifice his son, and God stops him. He says, no, I don't want you to sacrifice your son. I know now, though, that you trust me. I know now that you believe me, and so this promise is going to go forth through your lineage. And so you have Abraham, and then from that you have Isaac. Well, today the story gets to Isaac's kids, right? And what we see in the context of that. And so I want to pick the story up here in Genesis chapter 25, starting in verse 19. It says, these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham, he fathered Isaac, and then Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to be his wife. And then it says, Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. She wasn't capable of having children. And the Lord granted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. Now, just that scene right now, I think for some of you, it can hit close to home, because maybe some of you struggled when you decided you wanted to have kids. Maybe you haven't even been able to, and that's been the challenge and the burden of your life. And that is a very challenging burden to bear. I understand that. For some, though, it just took a long time or whatever else, and you were praying, God, we want to have kids. We want to have kids so bad, and please just grant this. And finally, you have kids. And then you start raising them, and then you start asking, why did I pray? God, give me kids. Now, I'm not saying children aren't a blessing, but children are also a handful, right? I mean, I have my 3 kids in the front row. I love my kids. Right? But sometimes, occasionally, every once in a while, a smidge of the time, they can be difficult, right? And that's the challenge sometimes of parents, especially when your kids make really bad decisions. It almost aches so bad. You're like, why did I invite this into my life at times? Because it can be so challenging as a parent when you have kids that are making poor decisions and sometimes are at odds with God or at odds with one another or at odds with you, right? It can be weighty. Well, what we see in the life of Isaac and Rebekah and their kids is it's going to be a challenge. They are going to be a gift, and they're going to be a gift with conflict. It says in verse 22, she conceives, and the children struggled together within her, and she said, if this is thus, why is this happening to me? Right? And she inquires of the Lord. Like, it's already an octagon inside her womb, right? These 2 children, she's got twins, and they are already fighting. And so then God says, well, here's what you have to look forward to. There are 2 nations inside your womb. There are 2 peoples from within you who will be divided. Awesome. It's going to be so great, like figuring out who gets the biggest piece of pie. All right, so 2 people, 2 nations in your womb, but it says, The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Now here's what's weird about this. I mean, obviously, you already get a sense of what's to come. They're going to struggle. They're going to be two distinct people groups in this struggle. But what's strange about that last statement is that it's contrary to the culture that they're a part of. See, the culture that they are in is that the older will be in charge. The older gets the lion's share of dad's estate. The older gets all of the benefits, right? So if you're the oldest son, you're the one that gets everything. That's the way the rule works. And it's the oldest son. So in my family, for example, I have all my kids here. I have 2 daughters and a son. The oldest ones are the girls. The youngest is the boy, the one that doesn't get in trouble and gets away with everything. That one, remember we talked about the younger ones? But in this model, it would be my son, even though he's the youngest, that would receive my estate when I pass away, right? Because he's the oldest son. So in this context, whichever boy is the oldest is going to get everything. That's going to be normally the rule. But here God says, but the younger is going to be really the one who is in charge, not the older. That's a weird statement. In fact, when you read through the book of Genesis, you find that consistently being the oldest brother kind of bites. Consistently. Cain was the oldest, didn't go well for him, right? Ishmael actually was the oldest, didn't go well for him. Now there's going to be this other older one, but he's going to serve the younger. It's not going to go well. God is doing this in this weird sort of way. And sometimes we don't pay attention to go, why would God do that? Why would God consistently violate the cultural rule of older and younger? And here's why. Because God is actually already highlighting the nature of the gospel of Jesus. He's already showing that what the gospel is all about, this message Jesus brought into the world 2,000 years ago, he made very clear and he made very simple. He says, you want to be the greatest? You got to be the least. You want to be first? Well, then you really have to be last, because it's going to be the last who are truly the first. It's going to be the least who end up being the greatest. And so God keeps modeling that story through Genesis. In fact, that's what I love about Genesis. It's all these stories. And the stories are sort of like when we teach kids. We teach kids stories more than we teach them these concrete thoughts and abstract philosophical notions, right? We start at a very juvenile level with story because we all resonate with story. So God keeps sharing the story of the gospel in these picture forms that show the greatest is going to be really the one lowest on the totem pole. And you have to start embracing that that's going to be the nature of the gospel. And so the younger is going to be kind of besting the older here, right? But I want you to understand in this too, God is not looking at these 2 boys and saying, which one is better? Right? Because that's going to be our temptation. To say, well, God's just looking ahead to what they're going to be like, and he says, well, the younger one's going to be the better guy. So even though I'm breaking the rules, I'm going with the guy that's better. That's not how this works. In fact, I'm going to turn your attention really quick to Romans chapter 9. In Romans chapter 9, Paul is using the story of these 2 boys. Their name is Jacob and Esau. And he starts in verse 10, and he speaks of Rebekah when she had conceived children by one man, our forefather Isaac. He says this about them. Though they had not yet been born, and they had done neither good or bad, in order that God's purpose of election might continue, not because of works, but because of him who calls, she was told, the older shall serve the younger. Now, the only reason I bring this up is because now we have a New Testament understanding of what's going on in this Old Testament story. And he says, you know what? God didn't decide that he was going to go with the younger over the older because the younger did something good and the older did something bad. He says, it's not based on good or bad. It's not based on their works. It's not based on their achievement. It's not based on all of their promise or potential. God says, it's none of that. It's simply in my grace, I've decided that the younger one, I will put my grace on. The older one is not the one I'm going to be working with. I'm going to work with the younger one. It's just what I want to do. It's just my grace. That's just how this is going to play out. And I highlight that. This is why it's important. It's easy for us sometimes to look at these characters in the Bible that God uses and instantly make them heroes without flaws. And yet what we're going to find is that both of these brothers are just big diphthongs, man. They're not good guys necessarily. They're not cleaned up. They don't make the best decisions. In fact, they both excel at foolishness in different ways. Now, one is going to be under this covenant of God's grace, but they're both foolish. And maybe the question is, well, why would God do that then? Why would God choose somebody that is foolish to do his work through? 1 Corinthians chapter 1 says it well. It says, God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. Right? God is going to say, I choose the younger, even though he's a knucklehead. I choose the younger, even though he brings nothing of potential necessarily to the table. I'm doing that specifically so that he may not boast in his accomplishment. He may not boast in his awesomeness or having it all together. No, it's solely so God can receive the credit in the life of a fool. And I guarantee you, both of these young men are going to be fools. In fact, the foolery starts even before they're born, as they're coming through the birth canal. Verse 24 of Genesis 25. When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red, all of his body like a hairy cloak. That is the nicest word. You know when people are like, that's a beautiful baby, but then they go home and go, oh, bleh, right? I think that's one of those moments, right? Right? So they name him Esau. And afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel. So they named him Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So Esau, real simple, comes out, looks hairy. They go, what's he look like? Hairy. What should we name him? Harry. That's what they name him, right? Very simple. That's his name, Harry. Esau means hairy. We can even call him Harry for the rest of the morning. That'd be fine. All right. But then you have Jacob, right? And Jacob comes out next, and he's holding the heel. So dad's like, what's he doing? Holding a heel. What should we name him? Holding the heel. That's what they call him, right? That's what Jacob means. But it's an idiom in the Hebrew language, which means deceptive, right? Or trickster, right? Or wily. So, Jake, I'm sorry. Your name means deceptive and wily. I love you, though. All right, so... But that's what his name means. So I'm thinking, like, if you're a child psychologist already, you're like worried about these kids because of what their parents are naming them. You know what I mean? Like, we're going to call him Harry. That'll help his self-esteem. And we're going to call him deceptive because we already don't trust him, even though he's just been breathing for 2 seconds. All right, so that's where it's at, right? And there's these two boys, and they are going to be contentious. Right? They're going to be contentious. It starts off that way. It's contentious. One's holding the heel of the other. They've been fighting in the womb this whole time. And they're dramatically different. They are different when it comes to skills. They're different when it comes to interest. They're different when it comes to disposition. They are different. In fact, it says in verse 27, when the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. And so you have Esau, or Harry, right? I mean, he's a redneck. He shops at Cabela's, right? He's that guy. He's into guns. Taxidermy is his decor in his house, right? He drinks black coffee. He has Copenhagen in his lip. He's that guy, right? He's totally that guy. He's got a sticker on his camel that says, don't tread on me. He's that guy, right? Totally Esau. Jacob, on the other hand, is kind of a hipster. Right? So he shops at kind of REI, but also Value Village, like you're like, all right, I see the mix there. He's a guy that's got a blog, likes to blog a lot, lots of Twitter, that's what he does. Likes to cook, apparently, stays at home, Netflix guy, doesn't like to go out as much. He's that guy that is like really arrogant when he orders coffee, He doesn't just get black coffee, it's like triple this and pump that and half cap and skinny and I want Egyptian goat milk and, whatever, Whatever his thing is, I want a little sprinkle of Madagascar cinnamon, that's him, right? He's that guy right there, right? So they're very different dudes. Here's what doesn't help these very different dudes. Verse 28. Isaac loved Esau because he ate his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Yeah, that's awesome. When your parents are actually like, Honor, you're my favorite, right? Like what kind of sibling rivalry can the parents stir up? Well, apparently quite a bit, because now they're deciding, Daddy loves you more. Mommy loves you more. Yeah, that's probably going to go really well for these two boys. Well, eventually, they, in their growing up phase, have a moment of kind of initial showdown in the story. It says, once, in verse 29, when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted. It says, therefore, his name will be called Edom, which is red. Again, there's nothing creative about this whatsoever, right? So, Harry Red, or now his name's just Harry Red or Red Harry. All right, so he says, let me eat, I'm exhausted. And then Jacob said, sell me your birthright now. Right, so let me see if I can reconstruct the scene. Esau's been hunting for the family. Right? So he's out there all day working hard for the family while his little brother's doing what? At home sitting around. Just cooking some stew, blogging, whatever he's doing, right? And Esau comes in, but he's a little bit of like a dramatic diva. I'm starving to death, right? He's like that. I need food, I'm gonna die. And Jacob, instead of saying, I'm going to give you some food because you've been hunting for the family all day. Thank you so much. He doesn't do any of that. He's like, ooh, he's weak. He's hurting. He's hungry. Exploitation time, right? And so he says, I'll tell you what. I'll give you some food if you sell me your birthright. Now, to us, this doesn't make a lot of sense. We read that as Western American Christians, and we go, who cares about your birthright? Well, here's what you got to understand. The birthright of the family gives you basically the privilege to be the heir of everything dad owns, right? So if your dad is wealthy, right, has a lot of crops and a lot of cattle and a lot of stuff and a lot of power and a lot of influence and has a big reputation, if you have the birthright, then you're going to receive all of that when your father passes away. So you're the primary heir in the will. You get the lion's share of the will if you have the birthright. And so here's Jacob. He's a jerk actually right now because he sees his brothers in need. And instead of being like, hey man, out of the goodness of my heart, I'm going to do this. Besides, his mother's probably already shared with them, God told me when you were going to be born that you're going to rule over your brother anyway. Don't rush this, right? Because God told them flat out, the younger is going to be over the older. Like, this is a known thing, right? But instead of Jacob being gracious and nice, he says, I could really use that birthright of yours right now. Right? And it's such a disproportionate trade. I mean, it's so disproportionate. It's like saying, Dad's $1 billion estate, Esau, I'll give you a Taco Bell chalupa, for the birthright, for the estate, right? Seems so crazy. And yet what happens? It says Esau, he goes for it. Esau said, I'm about to die. What use is a birthright to me? So Jacob said, swear to me now. Wow, he's bossy. Little ones are always bossy. So he swore to him, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and he drank and he rose and he went his way. And thus Esau despised his birthright. So Jacob here is exploitive, but Esau, he's impetuous. And if there's a lesson to learn, even in this story, it's pretty fundamental, which is what we see out of Esau is for momentary gratification, he gave up everything he actually held dear. Right? If you're a note taker, I want you to write that down. For momentary gratification, he actually gave up everything he held dear. Now, I say that because I think it's very easy for us to look at this and go, Esau, you're an idiot. You're an idiot. Right? You gave up everything for that one singular moment of a bowl of beans? Beans? Right? That's what you gave up everything for? But as I reflected on this in my own life this week, I realized how often there's this truth in the life of the Christian, which is, you see it throughout the New Testament, that we have this birthright in and of ourselves because of Christ, right? So Christians have a birthright. Christ has given us this right to be heirs of all of the rewards that he would give in eternity, right? So we're told throughout the New Testament, it's why we obey. We obey in part, I'd say first and foremost, we obey because we delight in God. But there's this other thing that God says, as you obey, I reward that. And so we have this inheritance that we see developed over the course of our lives, right? Because of our birthright. But it's amazing how much we, out of our own desire for momentary gratification, then give up the opportunity for that which the birthright offers us, right? So, man, I can continue to see the quote, the treasure in heaven, if you will, grow. But I go, no. I'd rather prefer my momentary pleasure. I would prefer my decision to sin. I would prefer to look at porn than enjoy God's future blessing. I would enjoy to gossip more than enjoy God's future blessing. I would enjoy to lie more than enjoy God's future blessing. I would enjoy to withhold my money as opposed to be generous instead of enjoying God's future blessing. In other words, we all pull an Esau. We all pull Esau's at different times where we say, I know what my birthright is, but for this momentary gratification, I'm going to give up on my birthright and enjoy the moment of gratification. A moment which, by the way, doesn't truly satisfy. It gratifies, but it doesn't satisfy, which is why typically we have to keep going back to the gratifications because they don't hold for very long. They don't stick around for a great deal of time, which is usually why we kind of go to them more and more and more, and they accelerate over the course of time. That's really what's going on here in a lot of ways. Esau is just giving up that which he most cares about for a momentary instance of gratification. And like I said, we all pull an Esau. But at the same time, Jacob, he's a terrible dude. He's an exploiting, terrible guy. He's a sinful guy. They're both sinful. What's amazing about this is even though they're both sinful, God is still good. And God is still committed to his plans. And God has set his grace and love on Jacob, even though Jacob doesn't act like one in which God has set his grace and love. And so what you see is even though God is working with and in Jacob's life, Jacob isn't always working in a way that is honoring to his God. He's sometimes going way off reservation, taking things into his own hands and doing things in ways that he wants to do them. And you're going to see that then in Genesis chapter 27. Right? So we've been in 25. We've gotten a sense of who these brothers are. We see how they struggle. We see how they take advantage of one another, the younger being the lesser, truly, even in character perhaps, of the two. But then you get to chapter 27, and you're going to find out that the whole family's dysfunctional. The whole family's dysfunctional. Now, as we get to chapter 27, I want to warn you, part of our tendency as human beings is we always want to find somebody to blame when things go bad, right? I mean, it's just our tendency. It must be somebody's fault. This week, Congress had all this stuff. It must be somebody's fault. It must be the Democrats' fault. It must be the Republicans' fault. It must be, some caucus's fault. Like, everybody's trying to find somebody else to blame all the time. That's human nature, right? And usually when you're doing that, you're trying to say, I'm not to blame, the other party is to blame. What I find so often in life is that almost everybody has some blame to go around. And in Genesis chapter 27, that's exactly what you see. It's exactly what you see. There's plenty of blame to go around for everybody in the family. Whether their actions are wrong or their reactions are wrong, there's blame to go around. Now, set the stage, chapter 27, right? So in 25, Isaac is 40 and has some boys. Now he is on his deathbed in chapter 27, right? He's at the end of life, and as he's at the end of life, it's a season in which now he must bless his heir and bestow promise to his heir. Right? So the blessing and promise were the things that God gave, first of all, to Abraham. In you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Gave it again to Isaac in chapter 26. In you, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed through your offspring. Now it's time for the heir, whoever the heir of the family is, to receive that same blessing and same promise. You get the estate, you get the power, you get the name, you get the authority, and you have God with you to do through you what he plans to do. That's going to be bestowed to the next line in the family. And since Esau is the oldest, it makes sense that the chapter opens with Esau. So starting in verse 1, it says, when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau his older son, and he said to him, my son. And he answered and he said, here I am. He said, behold, I am old, and I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out into the field and hunt game for me, and prepare for me delicious food, such as I love, and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die. Now, it seems pretty straightforward, but here's the problem. God's already said at the beginning, the older serves the younger. My plan is with the younger, not with the older. And so Isaac is basically already starting to circumvent the plan. Now, why? Well, because Esau's his favorite, right? That's what he says. He likes him more. He's an outdoorsy guy. He likes to hunt. He brings me food. I like food. I'm a man. I like meat. I'm a man. I like this boy. The other one just sits home and watches Netflix, you know? This guy gives me what I like. This one is the one that I favor. So this is the one that I want to bless. So this is what he plans to do, even though that's not even what God has instructed is to happen. The other strange thing is Esau here is prepared to receive the blessing, even though he knows full well that he already sold his contractual rights to such a blessing. He already knows that for a bowl of beans, he decided that, you know what, little brother, you can have my birthright. You can have the estate. You can take the top line in dad's will. He's already coughed that up, right? So he is not contractually entitled to this particular setting. But as so often the case, people say one thing and then do another. And people know what they should do, but they choose not to do it. And so they're going to go down their road anyway. Isaac's going to give it to Esau. Esau is going to take it, even though neither one of them have the right to it or to bestow it. Now, while this is happening, there's another thing happening in the background. Verse 5 says, now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So Esau, he went into the field to hunt for game and to bring it, and Rebekah said to her son Jacob, remember her favorite, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau. And what he told him was to bring him game, prepare it for him for delicious food, to eat it in front of him so that he might bless him before he dies. So she says to Jacob, now therefore, my son, obey my voice as I command you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 good young goats so that I may prepare them for delicious food for your father, such as he loves. And you shall bring it to your father to eat so that he may bless you before he dies. Right? So here's Rebekah. First of all, she is a nosy busybody. Right? So father and son are talking. She's listening. Oh, what's going on in there? Oh, yeah, that's a bad idea because that's not what I like, which means she's a schemer also. She's both nosy and a schemer. And so she's coming up with a pretty exotic plan here to deceive her husband. Right? I mean, it's exotic, you know? And she's going to make this meal, and it's not going to be wild game. It's just going to be some animals from like 35 yards away in the pen, right? And she's kind of concocting this whole thing because, again, she wants to reinforce her favorite. And so what you're going to see is Rebekah begins to dig a hole of a lie. And the reality is once you start digging the hole of a lie, you can never dig out. You can only dig deeper down. And she's prepared to go as deep as she needs to. Now, at this point, you could say, well, what about Jacob? How's he going to take all of this? Well, verse 11. After Rebekah says, here's what I want you to do. It says, Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Duh. Right? Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him, and he'll bring a curse upon me and not a blessing. So his mother said to him, let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice. Go and bring them to me. Here's a couple of things about this. First of all, here's where, again, Jacob's a lug nut. He doesn't say, is this right? He says, what if I get caught? Right? So this is why I keep trying to say, Jacob is not necessarily the greatest guy in the world. He is not this clean, squeaky, righteous, holy guy. He is only concerned, what if I get busted at this point, right? He's a chip off the old block, in fact. Go back to his grandpa, Abraham. Remember his grandpa? Remember what he did? Say, you're my sister. Liar. You know what's crazy? You know what Isaac did years later? Goes to Rebekah and says, hey, tell them you're my sister. He did the same thing as his father. Now Jacob is a little liar too. He's doing the same thing as his father and grandfather. It's a real learned behavior in the family, right? Here's where he's a bigger idiot though. This is where it's crazy. His mom says, and if we get caught, put the blame on me. I'll take the curse. And he's willing to let her. He's willing to let her. What a bad son. Willing to let your mom take the hit on this. But he's willing. So it says in verse 14, so he went and he took the goats and he brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared delicious food such as his father loved. And then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her older son, because they were still in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And then the skins of the young goats she put on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. And then she put delicious food and bread with him and said, give this to your father, right? Put this in the hands of Jacob. She puts it in the hands of Jacob and says, I want you to go to your father. And so he went to his father and he said, my father. And he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game. It's not your game. You got it from the freezer, man. Eat of my game, that your soul may be blessed. I look at this and go, wow, how elaborate, right? I mean, this isn't just shooting from the hip to escape a lie. I mean, this is like Oscar-winning performance stuff. This is storyboarded. There is like a costume department, right? There's character development. I mean, all of this is going on right here, right? It's like the biblical version of the Italian Job. It's like just this giant deception unfolding before their very eyes. Isaac is old, but he's pretty spry too, so he's not totally getting duped into this yet. Verse 20 it says, but Isaac said to his son, how is this that you have found it so quickly, my son? How did you hunt these things down so quick? Again, because I went 35 yards that way and got them for mom. And so Jacob answered, he says, because the Lord your God granted me success. Oh, man, how did lightning not strike right there? Right? I mean, not only is he lying, but now he's invoking God into his lie. How did this happen so quick, Esau? Well, it was crazy. I went out to hunt. Bam, right there. A couple of animals just took him down really quick, brought him to you, Dad, because God is showing me favor. Don't ever do that. Can I tell you? That is a hold my beer and watch this moment. Don't ever do that. It's a bad thing. What's interesting is Isaac's still not fully sold. Something still kind of is out of place. And so Isaac said to Jacob, please come near that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Jacob went near to Isaac, his father, and who felt him and then said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. I'm like, dude, if Esau was that hairy, like goat hair, well, that's something. That's a hairy dude. It says his voice, Jacob, hands Esau, right? It says, and he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. And so here you have kind of Isaac putting it on the scale. Voice, hairy hands, voice, hairy hands. I'm not sure. What's going to call the decision? Food. That's what's going to call the decision pretty much. Verse 23 says, so he blessed him. He starts to go into it, and here's how he goes about this blessing cycle. He said, are you really my son Esau? And he answered, I am. So again, still not sure, and that's important to how the story goes. Are you sure you're my son Esau? Yes, I am. Then he said, bring it near to me, that I might eat of my son's game and bless you. So he brought it near to him. He ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. And then his father Isaac said to him, come near and kiss me, my son. So he came near and kissed him, and Isaac smelled the smell of his garments, and he blessed him, and he said, see, the smell of my son is the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and the plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. So he says, all right, you got hairy hands, you have good food, you smell like field o' musk, I'm convinced you're my oldest son, Esau, and I will bless you. And so he blesses him and lays hands on him. And again, this is symbolic of a contract again. right? So as soon as he does this hand-laying blessing thing, in their culture, it's a done deal. It's like the old school handshake in American culture. Before we had a lot of lawyers and a lot of contracts, we used to have this thing called a handshake, and it was binding. You can read about it in history books. It's amazing, right? But that's what this was. It was this binding thing. Once done, it can't be revoked, right? Once you instigate this, you can't take it back. And here's the thing. You can't take it back even if you're deceived. Because that's our tendency to go, well, man, once you find out that this was deceptive, then it doesn't count, right? That's not how it worked in this culture. It's no different than if you decided you wanted to go buy a car from a used car lot, right? And you're talking with the salesperson and you think you know what the price is going to be, and they say, yeah, the contract, here it is, everything else, and this is what you're going to be paying per month, but you don't read it closely, you don't pay attention to everything. You sign the contract, a month later you get the bill in the mail, and it's like $250 more than you thought the payment was going to be per month, and you're all upset, and then you go back and they go, did you read the contract? You're like, no, I just wanted the car. Right? It doesn't matter. You're in it now. You're stuck. That's the contract you sign. And the same way with Isaac. Isaac's going, I don't know if this is my son. Could be, could not. Voice is wrong, smells right. Like trying to figure it out. I don't know, maybe. But that food, I want that food. Food sounds good. All right, I'll just go with it. Even though I have some doubts, I'll go with it. Even though I didn't read the contract fully, I'll go with it. And once he goes with it, he's just in it. Because he was hungry and he was impetuous. And so he blessed his son, and as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, when Jacob had secretly gone out from the presence, or scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, Esau his brother came in from hunting. And he also prepared delicious food and brought it to his father and said to his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's game that you may bless me. This is going to go bad. His father Isaac said to him, who are you? It's not the words you want to hear from your dad. And he answered, he says, I am your son, your firstborn Esau. And Isaac trembled violently, very violently. And he said, who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate it before you came, and I have blessed him. And yes, he shall be blessed. He's like, who was in here then that I just signed everything over to? See, here's what he knows. He's angry. He was deceived, but his spidey sense was going. He knew something was off, but he went with it anyway, and now he finds out he was deceived, but he knows that he can't reverse it. He knows he can't change it, which is why he says, who have I blessed? It doesn't matter who it was. Whoever it was is blessed now. Whoever he blessed has the family estate. Whoever he blessed has the bank account. Whoever he blessed owns everything now. Whoever that was, right? Because he gave it over. That's why he says, and he shall be blessed. It's unamendable. Right? Can't turn back the clock. So as soon as Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry. And he said to his father, bless me, even me also, my father. But he said, your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing. So Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob? For he cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright. Behold, now he has taken away my blessing. Again, that's why we know the name Jacob means deceptive, right? Is he not rightly named deceptive? He then said to him, have you not reserved a blessing for me? And Isaac answered and said to Esau, behold, I have made him lord over you and all of his brothers, and I have given him servants that are all the servants, and with all the grain and wine I have sustained to him. I've given to him. What can I do for you then, my son? He goes, I've given him everything. There's nothing left for me to give you. It's gone. So Esau said to his father, have you but one blessing for me, my father? Bless me, even me also, oh my father. And then Esau lifted up his voice and he wept. Then Isaac his father answered and said to him, behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall be your dwelling, and away from the dew of heaven on high. Your sword is what you shall live by, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke finally from your neck. Here's what's crazy. Isaac says, here's what I can bless you with, Esau. You're going to farm, and it's not going to go well for you. And dew and water and all of that for agriculture, there's not going to be much of it for you. And that sword, Better get used to it. Sleep with one eye open while you're at it. In other words, he gives them the opposite of any kind of blessing. He says, there's no blessing I can give you. I can't even give you the, may your crops do well. No, your crops are going to do poor. And the dew on the ground is not going to be there, and there's always going to be violence as a part of your life, and there's always going to be conflict and combat. That's true. Your life's going to be hard. That's the best his father can give him at that point, except for the fact that one day he will no longer be under the yoke of his brother. One day there will be a change, and he'll be freed from his brother Jacob. That is the little golden ray of sunshine here at the end of the story, right? You'll be set free from your little brother. Now, again, at this point, it's easy to feel for Esau. And it's easy to look and go, but Esau seems to be the better guy. And it's easy to look and say, this isn't even fair, man. This is a ripoff and a gyp. There's nothing fair about this. And I'd say, you're right. There is nothing fair about what Jacob does. It's not fair. It's not fair. But grace is not fair. Grace is not fair. If God was all about fairness, he would say, we all fall below the line. Let's be fair. What grace does is says it reaches below the line. And in grace, even though it isn't fair, grabs and pulls up. Right? That's the essence of the gospel. That's the essence of what grace is all about. And that's exactly what God is still going to do with Jacob. Even though Jacob is a lying, exploitive, stealing thug. That is the nature of grace. Doesn't feel fair, but it's how God operates. If that wasn't the case, I don't think God would have chosen either one of these guys based on their conduct. It's the reality. At the same time, I want to make sure that we're not so busy looking at how bad Jacob is that we go, so Esau's the good guy. Because that would be really tempting. You know, that's what we typically want to do. Which one is the worst? And that makes the other one good. No, they're both rough, right? They're both taking these different shortcuts in life, and they're both missing God's picture at different times in different ways. In fact, in Hebrews chapter 12, we see the writer there says, see that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, that by it many become defiled, that no one is sexually immoral or unholy like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single meal. For you know that afterward, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no chance to repent, though he sought it with tears. See, part of this is Esau's sin was simply rejecting what God would have given in a normal scenario. You know, he was willing to, for a bowl of beans, for a lesser thing, give up a privilege, right? Short-term gratification. And so because he wanted to settle for pleasure versus reward, he misses out. So much so that at the end of it, it doesn't matter. There's a consequence, right? And that's part of the problem he has to deal with now. There's a consequence. You made a decision years ago. And even though things can be forgiven, there are still consequences. And so when it's time to face the consequence, he sees himself as a victim. It's not fair. It's not right. My brother, ripped me off, whatever else. I mean, that's the way it sort of works. And so he's certainly struggling. So much so in verse 41 of Genesis chapter 27 rather. It says, now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing which his father had blessed him with. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. So the words of Esau were heard by Rebekah. Somebody told Rebekah that he said this. So she sent and called to Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, behold, your brother Esau comforts himself about planning to kill you. You know that's bad comfort, right? As soon as you want to comfort yourself by plotting the demise and death of another, that's only going to be a root of bitterness that defiles many, right? So she says, therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to Laban, my brother in Haran, and stay with him a while until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. I doubt that. Some of you remember what your little brother did when he was 12. Man, you just don't let that go. He says, then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereft of you both in one day? She's like, you'll just kill each other. right? Kill each other. So mom sets plans in motion to send her favorite kid away, in part to save his life. But the other part that comes out in the story is she's like, you know what? And I want you to get a good wife, and all of this Canaanite tent trash around here is not going to do it, right? So she's like, I don't want you to marry a Canaanite woman, so I'm going to send you away to my family, and you can find a wife among them. So Isaac then calls Jacob in chapter 28, verse 1. And he blessed him and he directed him. He says, you must not take a wife from the Canaanite women. Go, arise, take your wife from one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. He says, God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a great company of people. May he give the blessing of Abraham to you and to your offspring with you, that you may take possession of the land of your sojournings that God gave to Abraham. And thus Isaac sent Jacob away. Here's the tragic part. Because of these decisions and these consequences, they will never see their son again. They will never see him again, right? So Rebekah, her favorite son, she said, let the curse fall to me if we get caught. Guess what? Curse fell to her. She never sees her favorite son again. He will never see his father again. Sins can be forgiven, but they have consequences, right? And so this is going to be one of the consequences of that. And from it, Jacob is now adrift. He's exiled. He has the blessing of everything your dad owns. The only problem, you can't get near it. You can't set foot on your dad's property. You can't enjoy your dad's stuff because your brother will kill you as soon as you show up. So you have a birthright, but you have no access to the birthright. Nothing. He's just now out there, man on the run, out in the desert, looking for a place to go with family that is a ways off. I mean, that's his plight at this point, right? And so he thought, man, I'm going to fake everybody out. I'm going to do what my mom says. It's going to be a shortcut to my blessing, and instead it becomes a long, hard road. Remember what we learned? Sin is always the promise of a shortcut that leads to a long, hard road. That's exactly what's going on here. And so it says in chapter 28, starting in verse 10, that Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. And there he came to a certain place, which means nowhere. He came to a certain place, and he stayed there that night because the sun had set. And then taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and laid in the place to sleep. If the best you can get for a pillow is a rock, you know it's not a great place. I mean, even Hotel 6 will give you a real pillow, all right? It says, and he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top reached to the heavens. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. I want you to remember that. The angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land in which you lie, I will give to you and your offspring. And your offspring will be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you all the offspring, or in your offspring rather, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And so the same promise given to Abraham is given to Isaac and now is given to Jacob. There's going to be an offspring one day that will bless the nations. And then God says, behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. And so then Jacob awoke from the sleep, and he said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. Why? Because it was nowhere. But God loves to show up in nowhere places. It says, and he was afraid, and he said, how awesome is this place? A certain place is now this place. This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head, and he set it up for a pillar, and he poured oil on top of it, and he called the name of that place Bethel. Now, we read that, and we go, okay, cool. It's in the Bible, so cool. And we may not do much more with it. But a closer reading reveals some things that are important. First of all, again, the location is an unremarkable place, right? And what did it say again? A certain place. That means nothing. It's a place between places. It's like the animal bridge. It's nowhere. It's the place between places, you know? In that sense, uniquely unremarkable. And for Jacob here, it's desolate. But this desolate place is about to become a decisive place. That's what happens in the story. And I find in life that God loves to intervene in those no places or those desolate places and to make those pivotal places in our lives. Now, not all of those are physical. Some of us, we've been in those emotional wastelands, the emotions of places between places. I have this emotion that's bad. I want to get to that emotion that's good. I'm in between all of that, and God will show up in that space. Or God loves to show up in the circumstantial place between places. Right? There's all kinds of ways in which God loves to show up in that and show himself to us in those spaces. I remember years ago in my life, there was this time where I was just in the space between spaces. And I'd been a pastor, and I was really big on making sure we go line for line, verse for verse through the Bible, and everybody had awesome theology, and I remember I could just feel my soul withering inside. Because it was like, man, if this is all there is, if I get this book right, I should be so filled with joy. And I felt like I was trying to get the book right, and I felt so drained and dead inside, and I was so frustrated. I was in my office, I was in my late 20s, and I remember I took my Bible, and I literally just threw my Bible across the office, said words that are not appropriate for this space if I want to keep my job. And I said, if this is all there is, I don't want it. And it was in that desolate place of my soul that then God was like, if this is all you thought it was, there's so much you've yet to learn. And it was that place between places that became a new journey for me. And God met me in that space, right? Plain old little office there on 918 East Garland Avenue, right? Kind of a no place. But it was the place that became the space that became important to shaping then any sense of passion, any sense of true delight in God for what God has offered. I mean, that was where it all came alive. And so that's the first thing that I think really stands out to me in this is just God loves to show up in the no place, the place between places, and make it a decisive place. But the other thing I want us to notice here is that he calls the place Bethel. Bethel, which probably doesn't mean a whole lot to us. In Hebrew, it means house of God, which is why it even says that in the text. And he sees steps to heaven. Now, where this is important, just stick with me for like 2 minutes on this. There's another event earlier in Genesis chapter 11, and it's a name of a place called what? Babel. And this is a word play in Hebrew. Babel and Bethel sound really, really close, right? And Babel means gate of the gods, right? But Bethel means house of God, where the gate of God is. So thematically, they're similar. They have a union. And this is more the picture of a ziggurat, right? It's like a pyramid, but it's stepped up to the heavens. And so if you go back to Genesis 11, you had this whole thing where the people there were coming together to build Babel. And they're like, we're going to do this for our name, for our fame, for our renown, for our security. It was self-interested, selfish, self-motivated. It was all about them protecting themselves, them elevating themselves. It was so planned and predictable what they were doing. That was Babel, the stairway to the gods. But now you have Bethel. And Bethel is different because when we look at Bethel here, we see that, you know what? It wasn't sought. He's just going from one place to another. It's in the middle of nowhere. And it wasn't planned. It's not like Jacob thought, I should stop here and build something. Didn't do that at all. We don't see here self-sufficiency. We see divine sufficiency because it says, that God would do the blessing in this section. Unlike the self-security of Babel, where they said, let's build it lest we be dispersed. Here it's divine security. I will be with you. I will keep you. I will bring you back. Right? So you have two towers in Genesis. It's just like Lord of the Rings. How awesome is that? You have two towers. Tower of Babel, Tower of Bethel. Stairway of Babel, the stairway of Bethel. Fundamentally, we have two decisions in life. There's a wide road, Jesus says, and there's a narrow road. It's always the same, right? There's two systems in play. There's the kingdom of God or the kingdom of this world. I mean, it's always binary. It's just always two, right? And what's interesting to me is that often we look to Babel more than Bethel in our daily affairs in life. We look to the tools of Babel. We look to the language of Babel. We look to the security of Babel. We look to this world to provide us with things that, frankly, it doesn't have the authority to fully provide. No matter how badly we want security, no matter how badly we want significance in this world, we'll struggle to ever fully get either one of those. But God is now getting Jacob's attention, really for the first time, I think, in Jacob's life, at this intersection where heaven and earth meet. Right? And God is showing up in that intersection. Now, here's why I think this is important. John chapter 1. In the Old Testament, Bethel was a place, right? And you see it in Genesis. That's the house of God. Sadly, by the book of 2 Kings, they desecrate Bethel. It becomes pagan. And so the place that's meant to be the house of God becomes a pagan place where God is forgotten. But then we go to the New Testament, and you see that Bethel moves from being a place to being a person. And in John chapter 1, the background is that Jesus is starting to kind of rally his posse, right? Different guys are telling different guys. And so one guy is Philip, and Jesus tells Philip, I want you to follow me. And Philip's like, dude, I'll totally follow you. And he goes to his buddy Nathaniel. Says, Nathaniel, I met this guy. His name's Jesus. I think he's the Messiah. You got to check him out. And Nathaniel's like, I don't know, where's he from? And he's like, he's from Nazareth. And Nathaniel's like, nothing good comes out of Nazareth. That's like Sultan, man. It's like, like what? Hopefully nobody here is from Sultan. If not, there's houses for sale other places. All right, so, bad pastor. All right, so, I didn't plan that. That's my bad. All right, so anyway, Nathaniel is like, there's nothing good that comes from there. And they're like, you got to come and see. And so Nathaniel's walking up to Jesus. And then Jesus says, oh, here's a man in whom there is no deceit. He says that to Nathaniel. And Nathaniel's like, how would you even know that about me? I mean, do we know each other? Do you know something about me? And he goes, well, before you came here, I saw you under a fig tree, right? And this is supernatural, by the way. It wasn't like I saw you across the road under a fig tree. He's like, I saw you supernaturally under a fig tree. And so Nathaniel hears that, and he's just floored, right? And he's like, well, you know what, then you are the king of Israel. You are the son of God. You must be the guy. And here's Jesus' response that oftentimes we probably read over and it means nothing until you hear it in this light. Jesus answered and said to him, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, you believe? He says, you will see greater things than these. And he said to him, truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. When's the last time we saw that? Jacob goes to sleep, has a dream, sees the angels of heaven ascending and descending where he's at. And that's why it becomes Bethel. It is the house of God. And what Jesus is saying is, Bethel was a place, now it is a person. I am your Bethel. I am your Bethel. I am the house of God. And his point is, where I am is where God is. And if you are where I am, God makes his home with us. That is what grace is all about. It's not about how good you are, because again, Jacob wasn't a good guy, wasn't a kind guy, wasn't a thoughtful guy, wasn't a highly repentant guy. You don't see a time in that whole story where he goes, forgive me, God, for shafting my brother and taking the gold and leaving him with the empty shaft. I mean, he doesn't do any of that. He just keeps moving along, and yet God still in his grace makes a home with him. And in the same way, God makes a home with us because Jesus is our Bethel, the intersection of heaven and earth. So that we might know him, we might dwell with him, we might be encouraged by him, we might walk with him and have the promises that were given to Jacob. What did he say? I will be with you, I will keep you, and I will receive you home again. Not because we're great, but because his grace is that good. Let's pray together. Jesus,